me Alex Needham, who is our senior consultant in our financial performance management practice. All right, and just about our agenda for this webinar. First, we'll go over just a brief overview of Revelwood. I'll then hand it over to Alex for an overview of Planning Analytics, its new features, and then move into planning your migration and how we can help. We'll finish up with a Q&A session. As I said before, feel free to submit your questions. We'll address as many as we can, or we'll make sure to follow up with you individually after the webinar. Okay, now just a brief overview of Revelwood. We're an IBM Analytics premier partner. We cover a broad spectrum of business analytics solutions, but of particular expertise in Office of Finance, covering all things related to financial planning and reporting. In our 20-year history, we've helped hundreds of Fortune 100 and mid-sized clients incorporate analytics into their everyday thinking. Our ability to speak business first helps us understand your biggest challenges so we can build solutions that help you gain a competitive advantage and drive improved outcomes. Okay, now I want to pass it over to Alex, and he'll walk you through the rest of the presentation. Alex?
Thank you very much, John. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Needham. As John mentioned, I'm a senior TM1 consultant with Revelwood. I also wear the hat of being one of the primary trainers at Revelwood, which will be relevant as we talk about some of the ease of onboarding of a new employee. So before we get going into an in-depth look at why you should do an upgrade or a migration, let's start off by talking about what the difference is between an upgrade and a migration. So an upgrade is really good if you're not looking to change how you fundamentally work with your system. You would do an upgrade to ensure that you can maintain support, you can keep using your existing reports. Greatest security and performance upgrades. So when we're thinking about an upgrade, think about some stuff that you've already done. A great example of this is going from TM1 10.2 to TM1 10.2.2, right? If you went through that upgrade, you know that it wasn't a huge deal. It was just a matter of installing to get the latest functions, the latest security, and that's about all that changed. A migration, on the other hand, is where we can start to unlock all of the new features that IBM is putting into the product. With a migration, we see better performance, as Planning Analytics tends to operate much better in certain circumstances especially. It has much better visualizations, and truthfully, it is the future direction of the product. In fact, I'll show you later in this presentation where through one of the new tools, you can actually develop your entire system. I can build a dimension and build a cube and take a look at it and run it completely from the new interfaces. In addition, by migrating, you unlock the new tool that's called PAX, or Planning Analytics for Excel. Planning Analytics for Excel is like Perspectives or like Cafe. It's the Excel add-in that lets you work with TM1. It is a much more intuitive product to work with. It's much faster to pick up. As I mentioned earlier, right, I run the training here at Revelwood, and I've actually seen the time of learning the system go from being a day to get people to shaky comfort with Perspectives to getting to about halfway through the day of PAX and having people say, oh, well, this just makes sense. Why was this such a big deal before? So I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind that you'll be able to move things ahead faster with the new employee coming on board. So the next thing, before I really jump into in-depth, is to talk about where we would want this to land. So I imagine most of the people on this call are likely on-premise/local. So you have your TM1 installed in-house. Over the last few years, IBM has been pushing heavily their cloud options. And in the past, I would tell you, do whatever you want to. It doesn't really matter too much. But now I think that there's actually some very real considerations that need to be made. So let's talk about some pros and cons of a local instance versus a cloud instance. So my background before Revelwood was that I was in finance. And so with that, I understand the biggest desire of local is to have your data on site. I totally get it. I do think that it isn't as big of a concern these days. I've started to see the tides turn in regards to how companies view that, but that is the #1 pro of local, is that you have your data on site and everyone can sleep a little bit better at night for it. Another big benefit of local is that you get to set all of the timings. And what I mean by that is you won't have anyone say, hey, we're going to need to shut down the system on this day to do an upgrade. If it's on site, you get to control when those occur. So you can say yes or no to the timing of any given upgrade, ensuring that it's available exactly when you need it. Local also has a much lower ongoing cost. So the licenses that you're paying for are truly just licenses. So once you've done your first purchase of the server and you've acquired all the hardware that you need and everything else, it's not too expensive to keep it going. It's just maintenance of licenses, and that's it. With cloud, the #1 pro is that they maintain the system for you. What I mean by that is that they do all of your upgrades. Now, with old world TM1, that wasn't all that big of a deal. The release schedule was sporadic at best, but it had a length of time between any given new upgrade. However, what we're seeing with Planning Analytics is that they're switching out
Call me on the landline if you need me to describe what I saw if you can't get Holly.
So what we're actually seeing on cloud is that you can upgrade it much easier because they actually maintain it for you. And so no longer do you have those big, long times where you say, okay, I'm 3 versions behind now, I guess I'll do an upgrade. With cloud, they're going to make sure that you have the latest and greatest every single time that it releases, about once a month. With cloud, there's also no need for an in-house TM1 server knowledge expert. We've heard from we've heard from clients of ours that they have difficulty finding someone in IT to support TM1. If that's an issue you're having, cloud is a great way to skirt around it. In addition, with cloud, of course, there's no local hardware. So you don't have to buy a server if you don't already have one, and you don't need to do any sort of manual upgrades to it. All of that can be done through your licensing. And finally, it's much cheaper up front. IBM wants to get you onto the cloud so that they can have service that they provide to you. So in addition to paying for licenses, you would be paying for the service as well. John would be more than happy to help you sometime after the call to figure out what exactly those costs look like. The variance is just too large for me to speak about it on this call with such a diverse group of people on the line. So now that we understand what an upgrade versus a migration is and where our data can actually live, let's talk about what's changed, right? So there's been one big change that's occurred that will apply to both upgrades and migrations. Actually, there's 2. So the first one is, remember back a few months ago when every internet forum you had ever signed up for emailed you about new security stuff for the European GDPR rulings? Well, TM1 has those same security features implemented into it. And so by doing an upgrade, you're going to get every new security update that TM1 has had. GDPR is definitely the most broad sweeping. However, it's not the only security update that's occurred. The other big thing to keep in mind is that a lot of back-of-house items have changed. So we have new code functions. The one that's on your screen on the far left is to display that you can now have a temporary view in a temporary subset. This actually came about in TM1 10.2.2 FixPack 4. So if you are FixPack 4 to FixPack 7, in reality you already have this, you just probably don't know about it. And so there's all these small tweaks and tunes that have been made in terms of making life for your power users much better behind the scenes. And that's really what you're looking to get out of an upgrade. In addition, those upgrades bring in some of the new TM1 Web performance. And so there is some actual performance benefits to doing an upgrade. It's not strictly back-of-house items. With a migration, that's where we get some much more interesting options. And this is really where we're going to spend a good amount of time today. I want to show you that I really and genuinely believe that doing a migration is what makes sense. The big 2 things that you're going to notice, and the things that we're going to look at in depth today, is the new Excel interface, which is called Planning Analytics for Excel, or PAX for short, and the new web interface, which is called Planning Analytics Workspace, or PAW for short. So with PAX, you'll see that it it tries to take perspectives and pull it up to the current century. The goal is to make it a much more streamlined interface that you're working with, so that you spend less time figuring out how do I get to that data and more time actually looking at it. With Paw, the new web interface, it's amazingly good for dashboards. While you can use it for everything, you can use it for your system building, you can use it for your system administration, you can use it for your financial planning and inputs. Really where it shines is on the visualizations and on dashboards. And so that's what I'm really going to show you today from those items. So I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time telling you what I'm going to show you. I just want to start showing you. Let me swap this over to my screen. Make sure I'm showing the right thing. All right. And so what you're looking at here is Excel. But the big thing that's different about my Excel versus the one that you're using today is that my Excel has this IBM Planning Analytics ribbon showing up at the very top. So this is the actually new PACS interface. For those of you who have worked with Cafe, this may look fairly similar. So let's talk a bit about what makes PACS different than Perspectives. So the biggest thing that's a difference between PACS and Perspectives is that PACS works well over a wide area network. What I mean by that is I'm actually currently logged into a system that's located in Oregon, and I'm not going to have any sort of weird latency or lagginess issues. The way that you likely work with Perspectives today is one of two ways. Number one, you actually remote into a different computer and use Perspectives on that. The reason that you're doing that is because Perspectives really works best when it's on the same machine as the server. This leaves a really nasty taste in users' mouths, where the first interaction that they have with TM1 is that they have to log into a different machine. Kind of goofy, right? And so we found that a lot of first-time users are very unhappy with that setup. With PACS, you don't have to do that. The other option that you have with running Perspectives today is to install it on your local laptop and deal with some latency issues. Admittedly, if your data set is small enough, you might never encounter them, or you just might never notice them. But in reality, Perspectives was built to work specifically on the machine of the server. The thing that I want to point out for our existing customers is that PACS does not work with Dynamo. Dynamo is a Revelwood built tool that many of our clients love and use and depend upon. What's nice, though, is that PACS can be your interface that you use for everything that isn't Dynamo, because Perspectives still works with Planning Analytics. So Dynamo still operates, just you need to jump through whatever hoops you do today to use Perspectives. So if you had that TM1P icon that you use or the Dynamo icon that you use to open it up, those can still work with Planning Analytics. So if you have older reports, things that you know work beautifully well and you don't have any desire to change, we can still make that work for you. So don't worry, even if it isn't something that's supported in PACS, it's still supported by TM1 as a whole. So another thing that I need to talk about with PACS is that PACS has been subject to those constant releases from IBM, like I mentioned earlier. About once a month now, we've seen PACS get a fresh new update. And most recently, those updates have been primarily around performance. The reason that this is important to know is that if after this call, or even before this call, if you're doing your homework later and reading up on, well, what does the community at large think about Planning Analytics for Excel? What do they think about PACS? You may find spots where people are saying the performance is awful, it doesn't work, active forms are broken, all sorts of stuff. And I can tell you that before about March of this year, I would have agreed with those items. I would have agreed with that feedback because I had the same feedback that I was providing to IBM. But with all of the most recent upgrades that have occurred, I am genuinely seeing an imperceptible performance difference from Perspectives. They work at the same speed, and it's not something that is a deal breaker anymore. I had a client that started up just about 4 months ago or so, right around May, April is when we were talking to them. And they were asking us, should we go to PACS? At the time, I told them, honestly, I don't know. I need to test the most recent upgrades. Because as of last year, it was pretty troublesome. Nowadays, though, I don't hesitate. I genuinely think PACS is the best product that they have. I would strongly recommend using it. I think it's worth the migration just to get PACS alone, even if you never touch Paul. And as I mentioned earlier, PACS is a much faster onboarding process. What I intend to show you during this demo is that PACS makes it much easier to interact with the system. I'm not going to have a single screen that has just a gray box and 100 buttons up top like you have in Perspectives today. Instead, we're going to actually take a look at how things work and how it can be made more intuitive. So let's just start using it. So let's do this, the single most simple thing that you can do in TM1. Let's open a cube view. So how does that work? For the cafe users, you probably have already figured out the way it works. For the Perspectives users, this exploration button is really the main way that I interact with TM1 cubes. It's the way that I can get in and do my quick checks, quickly changing from one view to the next, changing from one element to the next. It's my very fast, high-level, how do I look at my data quickly. Off to the side, we have what is essentially our cube viewer, or excuse me, our server explorer. And so in that server explorer, I have my list of cubes. I can get my list of dimensions. Inside of each cube, I can see what dimensions are in it. I have my views and private views separated out, which is actually a really nice feature that most people overlook. And so instead of seeing this big list here and trying to figure out which one I want to open, I just have the one goal input that I intend on looking at today. So for me to open this, there's a few ways to do it. And that's going to be a running theme with PACS, is that there's a few ways to do everything. The reason for that is that IBM is trying to make sure that however your users most intuitively want to use the system, that it will work that way. So I could right-click and say, open an exploration on a new sheet or on this sheet, or if I know that it's ready to be sent straight to a report, I could do that as well. The alternative is I can drag it into the sheet, and it'll open up. For me, this is what's more intuitive. I personally like dragging it in, but whatever you're comfortable with is fine. So from this point of view, we're just looking at a cube viewer. It works exactly how you would expect it does. You can see that as I double-click, I can drill in. I can double-click to drill back up. I can go all the way up to the top of house and expand there. I can expand cost of sales. I can expand out revenue. I can do whatever I want to, right? It's just TM1. The way that you fundamentally work with your system, the way that you can interact and view your data won't change all that much, okay? And so with that in mind, I can also do things like changing what's on my rows and what's in my titles, just like you could do today, right? Nothing groundbreaking here. But what is groundbreaking is the way that I can move this around. So you can see that I'm working just in this little title bar up here. And what I have is a section for rows, a section for columns, and a section for titles, or picks, or fixed elements, or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of names that IBM has used over the years. It's all the same thing. So within Perspectives, there is one way to drag it from your titles to your rows, and that's it. Within PACS, I can actually drag it directly into the report itself, release it, and have it pop in. And so again, IBM has said, hey, some users find it more intuitive to drag directly to where it needs to be. We want to make sure that it can do that. And so it can. And not only can it stack, I can also have it replace. So if I put it on top, you can see the big, thick blue bar, or big, thick blue box show up around my rows there. If I release it, it just swap places. It does exactly what you would expect it to do. And so I think that in terms of view navigation, this makes a lot of sense, right? I can stack, I can quickly change my rows, I can change my columns, I can, of course, pick out different elements, I can drill in and drill out. All the things that you would expect to have are still there. But what's most interesting is what happens if I click into one of these numeric cells. It's not a DVRW formula. Weird, right? And so you may be sitting there on your side of the phone saying, this is garbage, this isn't live linked, it's recorded. But if I now change this from total organization to sales, we'll see all of our numbers change as well. So what it's doing in the background is instead of having this big, daunting DVRW formula, it's simply grabbing the data and putting it where it needs to be for us. I found that this makes your first-time users of the system far less intimidated. Think back to the first time that you got into TM1, the first time that you saw a DBRW formula. Your initial response is probably the same as everyone else's, which is, what on earth is this thing? What is this formula with 15 arguments in it? What is that? IBM has really tried to get away from that to make life a little simpler. It has an additional benefit, though. Because these aren't DBRWs, they aren't going to give you a #ref error if you open it without PACS open. If I were to save this and send it to you right now, you would still be able to open it and see the numbers that were last there. In addition, if you were to open it, you wouldn't see all the stuff up top. So you may be thinking, yeah, but I wouldn't know what was there. In reality, there's some hidden information here. So if you did send this off to someone, they would still see, hey, this is exactly what was being looked at. So someone could recreate this build in TM1 if they wanted to. The other thing that I'll mention, I'm not going to demo it just because it's probably not super relevant for today. However, there is the ability to commit data straight from PACS into TM1. So you can still use this for your planning. You just type directly over it, hit commit up at the top. It will prompt you and say, hey, are you sure you want to commit it? When you say yes, it sends the data straight to TM1. So it operates just like Perspectives or Cafe does. You can write and you can read straight from TM1 within PACS. So overall, I think this is probably pretty simple, right? Nothing too groundbreaking here, nothing to be intimidated by. So let's go to the biggest change that's happened, and that's in our subset editor. The subset editor, I think, has really taken the biggest change and is also the most influential change that you'll experience in the new Planning Analytics for Excel workspace. So within PACS, we now have this nice interface to do our subset editing. If you think back to what you had in Perspectives in Architect, right, it was just this gray box. It had like 3 or 4 rows of icons. None of them had any sort of labels on them. It was a nightmare for a new user to step in and use. This is much closer to a relational database. So if any of you have ever worked with Microsoft Access, for example, probably one of the most simple to get your hands on style database tools. This looks very similar to you. What we have on the left is all of our available members, and what we have on the right are the members that we're actually going to show. And so if I said, oh, I meant to add in, let's see, oh, I meant to add other expenses in, well, I can just hit the arrow over to add it. So pause for a minute and think about how you use Perspectives, right? If you say, all right, I need to build myself a subset. You pick out the 3 elements that you want, and you tell it, keep those 3. And what happens if you picked the wrong 3 or you missed one? Well, you have to hit show all and start over, right? There's no other way to do it. But within PACS, if I say, I meant to keep cost of sales, COS, well, I can just insert it back in, and then I can move it up to where it's supposed to be. And so it's a much simpler way to work with the system and much more forgiving. I don't spend so much time backtracking inside of PACS. Inside of PACS, it makes it way easier for me to just go straight into it. So let's take a look at how we can actually really manipulate PACS to make it as nice and simple as we could possibly have it to use it. So one of the big things that is a daunting issue inside of Perspectives is that things aren't made dynamic automatically. You have to teach your users how to interact with it to ensure that things can be done dynamically by recording a macro, right? More or less recording a macro at least. What Planning Analytics for Excel does is it makes everything dynamic from the get-go. And so in reality, if I were to click on this little scuba diving flag up here, we can see that in the background, I actually have MDX code that's running. Now currently, it's just pick these 4 elements. Not a big deal, right? So what happens if I tried to do something like give me net operating income and all of its children, right? So in the old world, you would say record steps. You would tell it to keep net operating income. You would hit the plus sign to expand it, and then you'd hit stop recording. That's how you do it in perspectives. Within packs, what I do is I can tell it, okay, the way I want you to insert isn't just keep the one member. I want you to take that one member and its children. And so I can hit this little curly arrow, which replaces what was there previously, and it automatically inserts it for me, which is really nice. And I didn't have to do some sort of recording. The MDX wrote itself for me. So for those of you who use TM1 today and who have to manage and administer the system, this is very nice to have. It means that you don't have to teach your users how to do an MDX subset, because that's something that can be really daunting for them. Instead, all we need to do is just learn how to interact with inserting members across, and it takes care of the rest for you. The users won't even know that MDX exists unless you tell them. Super helpful, and it's something that really lowers the barrier of entry into TM1 and into Planning Analytics. So now that we've seen what the children does, let's see what Descendants does. Well, it does exactly what you'd think it does, right? It takes net operating income and it expands it all the way down. Shows me everything that rolls into it. The one that I actually find myself using the most out of this is leaf nodes. So leaf nodes are all of your base level elements. This is where your planning occurs. So if you're thinking about how you do your planning today, if you're using views or you're using dynamic reports or using really any way to interact with TM1, now instead of having to figure out, okay, I need to keep this one and hit show all and hit filter by level 0, and I need it to work for these groups, and I need to have that same subset for these other parent elements, all that goes away now. It's just not as big of a deal as it once was. Because what I can do instead of having to record a macro each and every time, I can just tell my users, hey, tell it you want leaf nodes and move it over. That's all it takes. It's much simpler. The other one is a bit more of a niche case, but can still be helpful. Let's envision that we're looking at this travel other, and we have a colossal chart of accounts above us, and so we're not sure exactly how it rolls up. I can tell it to move with ancestors, and it will show me the full tree going upwards. It makes it very simple if you're trying to trace back, well, I think they'll have a duplicate here somewhere. You can see with any given element that you're starting with exactly what the flow up the tree is. So really getting to play with doing a insert with children here and insert with children here is something that becomes very, very helpful to have. It makes it much simpler to dump any new user into the system and have them use it efficiently from day one. One of the things that I mentioned is that this makes it very easy to take away any changes you've made. So something that I'll mention as well is that if I have two different insertions that I've done, so I start off by inserting net operating income with its children and then operating expense with its children. So those were two separate insertions. If I look at this as a definition view, I can actually look at either one of those and remove it. And so if I said, yeah, I don't actually want the net operating income part, if I hit remove there, my hierarchy view will show it correctly. And the MDX code is updated for it as well. And so now I can stack several insertions, one on top of the other. And I can take out any one without having it be such an ordeal. If you ever had to manually edit an MDX code in perspectives, then you can recognize quickly how nice that feature is. Because needs in the business world change. That should just be expected. That's something that we know is going to occur. So it's very helpful to be able to remove one individual step out of several steps that you've had. So what else does this interface have, right? One of the biggest and best changes to it, aside from all of the insertions and automatic dynamic nature of it, is the search functionality. So think back to your perspective searching, right? Asterisk, sales, asterisk. What am I looking for there? Well, I'm looking for anything that has the word sales in it, or anything that has the word expense in it, or anything that has blank in it. There's also the possibility of using question marks so that I can look for one individual character. It gets so difficult to teach new users how this works because most likely your new users are probably, people who have used Google in their life, and so they expect it to work like Google does. You just type in the words you want, and it finds it for you. It shouldn't be so difficult. With packs, they've taken that into account. If I search for the word expense, it's intelligent enough to find me anywhere that the word expense shows up, whether that's expenses or expense. If I came back and said, no, not expense, let's look at sales. They'll show me sales, the exact match, and sales promotions, the inexact match. So it makes life much simpler for you. You don't have to train users the simple stuff in the system because it just works the way they would expect it to. Something that I'll mention is up here at the top. We do still have our subset. So if you get get your selections set in a way that you know you want to use it again, of course subsets are still there. And similarly, if you have an existing system that you're migrating up, all of those subsets will still work here. It's still the same, no big deal. I, of course, can still apply aliases. Now, you can see that I'm in one of the IBM samples because this is all the different languages that it comes in. I still have things like attributes. And so if I wanted to view my attributes and get to search by attribute, I could also have this show. And if I did a search up above, it would pop up with any results from the attributes as well. Super handy to have. And the last big use that people have is the desire to flip it. So you can have it show up to where your total is at the top and everything else comes in underneath it, or so that your total is at the bottom, right? So do you want your total to be leading or trailing? Planning Analytics will support either one. So nothing that you've gotten used to in your current world TM1 is going to suddenly be taken away from you or anything like that. It still operates more or less the same. So that's Subset Editor. And if you can wrap your head around that, you can wrap your head around the single biggest change that TM1 has experienced. Subset Editor has been improved drastically. So let's come back to the actual Excel. One thing that I mentioned during the Subset Editor portion is that everything is made dynamic. And I wasn't lying. So you may notice up at the top in the exploration menu here, I actually have a button that says MDX. So think about how you operate with TM1 today, right? If you have a user that builds this view and they're not an administrator, how do they share it with somebody? Well, they could slice it and email that workbook to somebody, or Active Forms it and send that workbook to somebody. They could send them a screenshot and tell them how to build it. They could go over and build it for them. That's pretty much it. Of course, they could bug you as the administrator to move a private view from their user folder to someone else's, but hopefully you don't do that too often just for your own sanity's sake. With PACS, the view is actually created with an MDX code as well. So now if I build this, and I need my neighbor who works 2 offices away from me, I'm in a multi-conglomerate, I'm in Atlanta and they're in New York City, I can just send them this snippet of MDX through an IM or through an email. They can drop it into their exploration MDX, and it'll recreate this exact view, assuming they have all security rights to see the element. So it takes away a lot of those just kind of pains that we experience by just thinking it through and figuring out how can we have users interact with the system in a more simple way. I think that IBM has done a really good job of taking those steps. So what can an exploration not do, right? I've told you all the things that it can do so far, but I haven't told you anything about what it can't do. So I think probably the most notable is reporting. So if I said, oh, I really need to show off these first 3 quarters revenue, I want to highlight them yellow so my boss will really notice it. If I hit refresh sheet, that formatting disappears. So an exploration is really your place to get kind of your rough sketch, more or less, of what you want. Once it's time to actually build a report out of it, we want to convert it to a different option. So there's 3 total. I'm going to focus on 2 of them today. We're going to take a look at quick reports, and we're going to take a look at dynamic reports. So let's start with a quick report. If I make a quick report on a new sheet, it takes this view and it drops it into a new sheet, right? The big change that we can see here is we now have all of our title elements shown clearly up above. It's something where if I were to print this off, a user would still be able to see it. In addition, now if I do highlighting, the highlighting actually stays in place. And let's not forget, right, it's Excel. So if I wanted to say Q3 versus Q4, I did that minus that, drag it down and tell it to recalculate, resize it, shrink that down. When I hit refresh sheet, that doesn't disappear, right? It's just Excel. There's no need to be too concerned by it. What's nice, though, is that this is still something that is linked. So what's interesting is if I click into here, it's still those numbers. It's not a DVRW. It's pretty cool, really, how it works out. And so you may think, oh, yeah, well, this is another one of those snapshotted things about showing me it can't be real, but it can. I could come up and I could type in the name sales here. Alternatively, I could look up in my business units exactly what element it is and pull it through. I'm just going to type it just to save us some time here, because I know that this is called total organization. And so when I tell it to refresh the sheet, we pull all the new numbers through. Similarly, we could see that all of my variance calculations went off without a hitch as well. So it's nice and simple to interact with. It's something where if I have kind of a static view that I want to refresh a lot, that I want to be able to make very small tweaks to and have it show up, this is a perfect view to do it in. So if I were to compare this to old world, I would say this is pretty similar to a slice. So if I came in and told it, nope, we're in 2005 now, and I refresh sheet, it'll pull through nothing because there's no values for 2005 here. When I go back to 2004, then it pulls it through. So it functions like a slice does in that it will pull whatever line that it's on. But it functions like a slice also in that this isn't dynamic. Notice that this is just a list of elements. I could always type in what a new element name is and have it pull that up instead, but it's not something that is going to dynamically rebuild. For that, I need to go back and tell it to convert to a dynamic report on a new sheet. And dynamic reports are really important for a few reasons. Number one, I regain that dynamic nature that we have. So if I double click on revenue, it expands like we expect it to. And the other big thing that's important is I get my DVRWs back. Yay! I miss them so much. That's exactly what you're saying. I can hear it from here. So with these old reports, with the DVRWs, the reason it's important is that this is what allows your current world reports to work in packs. So I still have my TM1 RPT row. I still have all my sub-VIMs. I still have my DVRWs. If I had DBS or DBSS or DBR or whatever, it all still works in packs. So your old world reports can still work here. So don't lose sight of that. It's a very nice thing to have, and it's important. The other option is for what's called a custom report. A custom report, really, it's just that I can set more than one on any given sheet. There are some other differences from it. It operates more like a true slice in that it has DVRWs baked in, but really, if you know quick reports and dynamic reports, those are the ones you're most likely to use day in, day out. So I've spent, what, 20, 25 minutes now on packs. Let's jump over to the other big new interface I talked about, which is called PAW, Planning Analytics Workspace. So I'm going to be using today a demo, a tool that Revelwood has built called Lightspeed. So I'm not going to talk too much about Lightspeed, but just to give you some idea, since the branding is going to be on several of the slides we look at. Lightspeed is the acceleration tool that Revelwood is using to ensure that we can start you up as fast as possible. So if you're on this call and you're someone who has an existing system, it may not be super relevant to you that we have this. But if you're on this call and you don't have a system, what we would be using Lightspeed for is it works as the foundation that we use to start you up. So instead of us starting from scratch every single time, we can use some broad framework that we have built here to get you started onto a solution. It's pretty handy to have. It also operates as a really good way for me to show you what PAW looks like. We have visualizations built in, so this is a good thing for me to be able to use to show it to you today. So this is an opening portal. All I've done is I got logged in because you don't want to sit and wait while I type in my password and mistype it and then have to retype it and all those steps. So this is the reporting dashboard. I can have it go to planning or administrative, but for now, let's focus on reporting. So think of this as being like a C blank O, or a manager, or a VP, or a director, who's coming in and saying, okay, just show me what the numbers are. And so they pop it open and they see the things that are important to them. They see a few table elements. They see a pie chart, and they see a column chart comparing between targets and values. So if they said, you know, looking at this, America's looks a little low here, and it's a little low on the pie chart. Let me get a little bit more information. This is all linked together. All they're doing is picking from the big slicer that says country. They can pick America's and have it zoom in for them. And so this is something where it all talks to each other. It all works together. It's really nice in that we don't have to build 1,000 various views and have them toggle to it. We can put in the slicers that are important, and they can quickly change back and forth as they need to. Really helpful to have. In addition, though, we can really kind of make things however we see fit. So let's take a look at the revenue dashboard. So my revenue dashboard operates more like what you may be envisioning when I say a dashboard. It's got all sorts of information on it in some really pretty ways. We have things like an actually nice-looking line chart, a nice-looking column chart, a word bubble, if that's something that you're into. I personally don't get it too much, but hey, it's there. And we have heat maps for various continents. It's really handy to have, especially if you're looking at something like sales and units sold. This is a really nice view to have. So if you compare this to what TM1 Web is today, PAW is really just miles beyond it. PAW is built to be something that's pretty and presentable. The TM1 Web is really just there for me to upload an Excel file to and be able to use it. So let's go back and see what it's like to actually build one of these visualizations. So I'm going to cheat a bit and start with a table. I could go in and drag out the table and build it from scratch, but it's kind of nice to just have one. So I have stuff hidden off to the side where I could go in and pick my server and pick my cube and pick my view and pull it in. That's all that I've done here, just taking some of the grunt steps out. And what you notice is that this looks pretty much like what we saw in PAX, right? The big difference is that instead of having my rows, columns, and titles all next to each other, my title shows up above. Otherwise, this is very similar design aesthetic-wise to what we were just looking at. It's nice. You don't have a completely different change of interface every time you go to a new one any longer. So I can change the visualization from here quite easily. I can pop open a submenu that just has a change visualization option. If I click into it, it gives me all sorts of things that thinks it could be relevant for. So notice that I don't have any sort of mapping information here, and so it doesn't give me the option for a map because it wouldn't make sense. I think that's a totally reasonable thing to do. And so I can tell it, hey, I want to see it as a column chart. And it will quickly make me a column chart. Now, I've got this column chart here, but I really didn't want it grouped by account. I want it grouped by period and then show me accounts within it. Well, all I have to do is just swap them. That's all it takes. And so there is no more that need to constantly go back and rebuild everything from the ground up each time. It's nice and simple, drag and drop. It's a much simpler system to work with at this point. And of course, I can change it to some of the other visualizations. So maybe we want to see what a stacked bar looks like, which would make a lot of sense for this, right? We have our quarters, we have our value, we have the account. Alternatively, we could swap it around and have our accounts and then show which quarter the information came from. So if we're looking for something like seasonality, right, we could say, oh, well, we really racked up on professional fees in Q1. Well, we should make sure to bring that into our planning. Super helpful to have. And of course, I still have all of my slicing options up top. So if I want to focus on just company 001 Macintosh, I can really hone in on just their data. And so that's pretty much it for visualizations on PAW. I don't have to spend a whole lot of time in it because it's built to be easy to pick up. Now, I need to circle back around to a promise I made to you right at the beginning when I first started talking like 40-ish minutes ago. So one of the things that you can do with Paul is to actually administer a system. And this is where we start learning about the new planning analytics hierarchies that you've seen IBM talk about. So what hierarchies are is that I can have an attribute within a dimension, and I can actually have it build myself a consolidation or a hierarchy based on that attribute. And I think it's really easiest to just show this one. So I'm going to change out of our Lightspeed demo because just like how you wouldn't play around in your production environment, I'm not going to play around in Lightspeed. So I'm going to actually make a new dimension from scratch, and then I'm going to put hierarchies into it. So let's start by making a dimension. I think I'll do one on cars. Since we're in the U.S., most people know at least a little something about vehicles. I'm going to give myself some room to work with here, a little more room to work with. All right. So I'm going to have first my roll-up as all cars. I'm going to have car 1, and I'm just going to make a couple more of them here. And commit. And just like that, I have the startings of a dimension. Pretty cool, right? So I can now set all these to be a child of it. And so now you can see it works just like any other dimension would. I have my little plus sign. I can open it and close it. All sorts of cool stuff. For me to build a hierarchy, though, I told you that's attribute-driven. So now I need to set up an attribute or two for myself. So I'm going to add, I think, 2 new ones. Let's go with engine and transmission. So since I am at least in the southern United States, we pretty much only have automatics here. So that's what most of these cars are going to be. Let's go with automatic, and we'll send that all the way down the list here with 1 manual at the bottom. For the engines, let's see, I'll have a diesel, a 3.6 liter, a 2 liter, and then a couple of Hemis in there because I am southern, so I have to have them. Another 3.6 liter and a diesel. So if you had this style, right, something that would be reasonable to say, okay, well, show me the sales for all of my diesel-style cars. It's a pretty reasonable request. How would you do it in your TM1 today? Well, I'd insert a new element called diesel, and I'd manually drag these under it, and all sorts of stuff, right? Within Planning Analytics, it's as simple as right-clicking, hitting Create Hierarchy, and saying, yes, I'm sure. And so now I have all engine, which is just, wow, which is just referring to the engine attribute. And we can see that it's grouped it by the type. So these were all diesels, these were all 3.6 liters, these were 2 liters, these were Hemis. And so they've each rolled to their spot, and they act just like any other consolidation would. Pretty cool, right? It's really, really nice to have. In addition, I can build a new hierarchy for transmission. And so we can see that all my automatics get grouped and all my manuals get grouped. So what's cool is I actually have these now as options that I can just open. So cars is my default hierarchy. It's what I built manually. Engine is based off of the engine attribute. We have transmission, which is based on the transmission attribute. And finally, leaves. So this hierarchy is built automatically. It's just all of your base level elements. So these hierarchies can be used either in PAW or in packs. They're really handy to have. Currently, they can only be created in PAW, but I know that that is on the short list of things that IBM wants to get integrated into packs. In addition, semi-recently being within the last 3 or 4 months, you can now write rules against specific hierarchies. And so even though these are virtual elements, they now work similarly to anything else. And so that's kind of it for PAW and packs. They add a lot of value. I really think that they are truly the way of the future for IBM, and I think that it's something that needs to be into your organization. So let's talk about how we get there. Let me swap back to the slideshow. There we go. So on the screen at this point, you should see an arrow that has the Revelwood 3-step migration plan. So the way that this operates is that we have 3 steps that we follow that we can make use of to help make your migration or your upgrade even as easy as possible. So first is that we want to have an impact plan. So we want to meet with you one-on-one and get to talk through what exactly you're looking to do and make sure that we're all on the same page. We want to then come on site, spend a day or 2 on site with you, make sure that we've gathered all the requirements, that you're all ready, and also that can be time for things like training to get users ready to work with PACS. And finally, we will do the actual implementation. At that point, we'll work side by side with you and ensure that your migration goes as smoothly as possible. So, John, did you have any sort of closing remarks before we jump into question and answer?
Just the one, Alex. I think that we're seeing more of a black screen. We'll get this just out to everybody. They'll show them that 3-step migration program with our impact plan, roadmap, and implement. And I'll certainly be happy to help anyone out with each steps as we go along. So we had a couple of questions, Alex. One I'll toss out to you is, does a migration require rewriting or redesigning cubes, rules, feeders, TI processes, and web sheets?
That's a great question. So a migration is, many times we'll take that as an opportunity to do some efficiency measures. However, there isn't any function that works in current world TM1 that gets broken by migrating to Planning Analytics. So if you have a fully functioning environment that works as efficiently as you could ever want it to, and you say, no, there's no need to redo anything, we want it to operate largely the same, just with the new interfaces, there's no need to do any sort of rewrite, redesign of anything within the system. The one thing that I would definitely want to look at in particular is your web sheets. With web sheets, there's always the possibility of saying, hey, maybe this now works better as a PAW book instead of as a web sheet. The difference there is fairly slight. However, it primarily has to do with what the visualizations look like. With a web sheet, it's an Excel book that we upload. With a PAW book, it's something that we design directly in PAW. So if you saw some of those visualizations, you liked them, and you said, yep, definitely want to show some of these new visualizations and make use of them, that's where there would be some redesign required. Otherwise, everything you have will work completely out of the box going forward.
Okay, thanks, Alex. I'm going to grab one. Somebody asked, in perspectives, you could write VBA in Excel to interact with TM1. And the question was, is that available in PACS also? And yes, you can. The commands in VBA will be a little bit different, but yes, you can. So one other one, and I know we're kind of running up against it here, but can the virtual hierarchies be accessed in PACS? We showed they couldn't be created or maintained in PACS, only PAW. Can the virtual hierarchies be accessed in PACS?
Great question.
That'll give it to you, Alex.
Yeah. Yes, the virtual hierarchies can be viewed in PACS, and they can be interacted with in PACS. So if you create it in PAW and you're working in PACS the next day, you can drag it over. It shows up more or less as a subset that you would apply. So it operates pretty similarly. It's just on the maintenance side. I genuinely hope that that is on the very short list for IBM. I know that they've mentioned it a couple of times, but I don't know where their process is in terms of allowing for PACS to maintain and create them. However, yes, it can be viewed in PACS.
Okay, great. And that, Alex, thank you. That looks like it's about the questions that we've got right now. We are just about on time, a couple of minutes early. I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar. I hope you found this informative, and we look forward to working with you as you plan your migration to Planning Analytics. And I know it sounds like there's a lot of time between now and the end of support next September, but now we've got budget season getting started, then we've got the holidays and year end. Next thing we're really rolling into Q2. So there really isn't that much open time. This is a perfect time to start scheduling and talking to us about this project. If you have any questions